So next speaker is Allison Okamura, and everyone know her, so I will not introduce her very much, from Stanford University. She's also, which worth mentioning, a director of the graduate studies for mechanical engineering at Stanford, but also deputy director of the Stanford Neuroscience Institute. Allison?
Great, thank you very much. So it's perfect to go after Catherine because she gave such a wonderful introduction to the field of haptics as well as the human perception aspect of things. So that lets me dive in a little bit more directly into where did haptics grow out of robotics and where is it going. So one of the most important haptic devices in my life was this one. It's the Phantom Premium haptic device that grew out of one of Ken Salisbury's students at MIT. And it was really the first device that researchers could use very easily in order to create extremely compelling, high-force kinesthetic interactions, both in virtual environments and for teleoperated systems. And then we began developing in our field great haptic feedback for teleoperated robots like this Da Vinci surgical system, which Catherine also highlighted in her talk. And the idea here was that you would get force feedback, point-based force feedback on the hands during teleoperation, and this could also be scaled. And I do think many of the challenges with teleoperation and this type of kinesthetic feedback have been solved, especially as mentioned yesterday during the panel, now that even surgical robotics have force feedback in clinically, commercially available devices. However, like Catherine, I've sort of gone on a journey from kinesthetic devices towards wearable haptic devices, and also from the fingertip to the arms and other locations on the body. So I want to talk a little bit about that journey because it seems to be something that's happening overall in the haptics field. So as Catherine noted, there's this huge importance of cutaneous or skin-based interactions. And so largely spearheaded by Domenico Pratechizzo, who's the next speaker, our field began developing skin deformation devices at the fingertip that provided extremely compelling interactions with virtual or teleoperated environments. So even if you didn't get the wholesale kinesthetic feedback that you would have gotten with the original Phantom Premium or the surgeon's console of a Da Vinci surgical system, just stimulating the skin locally could provide very compelling interactions as shown up here. Now, these original devices were very difficult to manufacture, students with tweezers and very tiny screws putting them together, but having to make them lightweight enough to go on the fingertip. And so we started using other types of manufacturing techniques, things like origami devices, as shown at the top here, as well as 3D printed devices with semi-soft and soft materials. And we also made a move from electromagnetic actuators to pneumatic actuators, which made me a little bit nervous. Peter said yesterday that one of our big challenges in our field of robotics is actuators, and that's true in the haptics field as well, especially when you want wearable devices that are going to be lightweight, and they can't be noisy, and they have to function, of course, for many, many cycles. I think one side note I'll make is that people often criticize our field in robotics that we might make a demo that works once well for a video, and we can capture it and take a little bit of data and present it. The haptic devices, they really force us to also make actuators and devices that are super repeatable and can last over many, many cycles, because we almost always perform human subject studies, like the ones Catherine described, where they have to work for long periods of time, and users might do whatever they want with the device. And so we have to have something that's also adaptable to what users might decide they want to do with it. So anyways, back to this skin deformation idea. Again, the idea is to get away from full kinesthetic feedback just to local cutaneous feedback, and it turns out that's a really compelling way to go. However, we also want to move away from the fingertips. And the fingertips were great because, as Catherine said, we have incredibly high density of mechanoreceptors. We get all sorts of useful feedback, but there are a number of scenarios where we want to move on to other parts of the body. But we have a lower density of mechanoreceptors and different types of mechanoreceptors. So that's one challenge that Catherine highlighted. But another challenge is this idea of passive versus active touch. Our bodies are designed to explore the world using the fingertips, and that active touch perception allows us to get the types of, say, persistent excitation that we need in order to sense certain things about the environment. If you think now about feedback on other locations in the body, we're not really designed to explore the world through touch at those locations. And so we have to think about, if we start giving feedback to other locations on the body, is this in a literal sense, like you're teleoperating a robot that hits its arm on something and then you get feedback? Or is it a more of an abstraction, like I touch a virtual object, but instead of feeling it on my fingertips, I feel it someplace else in my body? And how do people adapt to that? Because it's not a natural mode of perception for humans. So there's a couple reasons why we might want to do this, even if it's not necessarily natural. So this first one is, as we move towards virtual and especially augmented reality, we want to keep the hands free. To truly have ubiquitous mobile devices like an Apple Watch, we're moving away from the fingertips so that we're not occluding our physical interaction with real-world objects. Another reason is that, like I said earlier, we may actually want to do this literal thing of teleoperating humanoid robots where we get haptic feedback at any location in the body. And I highlighted this during the panel yesterday, that when we get to truly intimate interactions, like we want to have robots in our home that, say, help someone get out of bed and into a wheelchair, these sorts of full-body interactions are important. They may not be autonomous initially, and you may need haptic feedback to a human operator. And there are other scenarios like remote medical diagnosis and care where there really is going to be a human on the other side, and that's the whole point. So full-body telepresence, as well as what's on the previous slide, augmented and virtual reality, and unencumbering the fingertips are really important to us. So there's a lot of ways that we've tried to do this over the past 10 years or so. Some very awkward and unattractive and cumbersome, and others a little more so. Some a little strange and weird, like soft-growing robots that grow onto the body. But we've been trying to build on techniques in soft robotics using soft materials for interfacing with the skin, but also because the pneumatic actuation has the potential to offload the actuators from the distal areas of the body and therefore make the devices more lightweight. But still, many of the devices are not exactly where we would like them to be. So for the rest of the talk, I want to give a little bit of inspiration for the types of new materials and fabrication methods that we can use to make haptic devices off of the fingertips and pattern their actuation in a way that's quite compelling. So we were inspired, actually, as a number of researchers in the haptics field were, in about the mid-2010s, Facebook, now Meta, Reality Labs, and others were really pushing the idea that we should have social touch devices. And so, for example, if you want to stroke someone's arm to help them calm down or communicate some other social emotional cue, how could we do that? Now, you could literally take a robot finger and drag it across the skin, but that would be extremely awkward. So the idea is, how do we use distributed haptic displays with multiple contacts, and how do we pattern them to give the haptic illusion of, say, a continuous stroke when what you're actually doing is touching discretely at different locations? So we did a number of human user studies to try to figure out what are the different patterns, what are the different types of indentations and timing that's required to make this work. Because trust me, if you do it wrong, it feels creepy, like a spider crawling up your arm, rather than something that's smooth and comforting. So there are these continuous stroke haptic illusions that were developed in large part by Heather Culbertson, who's over there, when she was in my lab as a postdoc. And we combined these topics together in order to create social touch devices that could create the sensation of a number of different compelling social emotional cues, and people would rank them similarly to how they would feel touches from human interactions. Although there is a caveat to that, which is that people rank touch interactions differently if it's a stranger versus someone they're very close with. And our haptic device ranked more like a stranger than a loved one touching you, which is actually not surprising and maybe a little comforting that people can actually tell the difference. So in moving forward, we need to think about how we actually enhance wearability of these devices. The one I showed in the previous slide showed pretty heavy, clunky electromagnetic voice coil motors, which would heat up over time. And a combination of pneumatics and new fabrication techniques might hold the promise to this. So I'm just going to spend a few slides telling you about my postdoc Cosima Dupasquet's work on enhancing wearability through variable stiffness knitting. This is a collaboration with a group at MIT, Skylar Tibbitz's lab, which makes amazing knitted structures. And they helped us integrate pneumatic actuators into a knitted substrate where we can apply forces to the skin while still having it encased in a knit that is very wearable. But a key innovation here is that we need to be able to apply reaction forces. If you want to have an actuator push on the skin, it needs something to push back against. And by using variable stiffness knitting, both through changing the topology of the knit, as well as by varying the material properties, for example, through thermoplastic fibers, which can be heat treated to make different areas of the knit very stiff, you can get an overall sleeve, which is lightweight and comfortable, but can still apply up to 40 newtons of force. We don't usually need that much at different locations on the skin. So a quick video, I will skip through and run, shows you this pneumatic sleeve, currently used for social touch, but as you'll see in a minute, there's a number of other applications as well. And the idea is to use very simple, repeatable, safe pneumatic actuators and control them very quickly with a portable, wearable pneumatic supply. So pneumatics does have challenges in terms of noise and weight, but ultimately, the fact that you can transmit the fluid over longer distances allows you to put the pumps or whatever is driving it into a different location on the body. And that can actually be very useful. So we would like to use these types of devices not only for social touch, but for guidance, feedback, training, rehabilitation, and a number of different scenarios. And that just brings me to a quick conclusion on where I think we are in terms of challenges for these types of soft wearable displays. So we're worried about wearability. How do you have good comfort, low encumbrance, not have sound? We need to have high reaction forces while still meeting these wearability requirements so that you can feel forces at different locations in the body. And we need to develop better methods for interaction design with these types of devices. And with that, I'll thank my students and sponsors and all of you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Questions? Yes, over there, to the right.
Great talk, thank you. I guess you talk a little bit about these illusions, but I think one of the interesting things about a lot of the haptics work is sometimes it starts to get to the border of what we know about the brain, and also the resolution of the sensors in the body, the mechanoreceptors and things like that. So I'm curious if how people learn to use these devices is sort of another direction that you're interested in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question, absolutely. So Raja mentioned at the beginning, I'm part of the Neurosciences Institute at Stanford, and working closely with neuroscientists and psychologists to understand human perception is a really critical part of our work. The learning is very interesting. On one hand, we'd love to have devices that just get used immediately and no learning is required, but there is a whole field of passive tactile learning where the idea is people use, for example, devices that would replace other senses like vision or sound by learning to correlate touches that they feel to those. And humans can adapt and learn in that way, but you have to be pretty motivated and willing to learn over time. So there is a tension between something that works right out of the box and something you have to learn, and figuring out what are eventually the right consumer application is going to be for each. So thanks for that question.
Another question?
One more.
Hi. I was wondering, a quick question, and this might not, why engineer around all the pneumatics and the kinematics when you could take a shortcut just to neurostimulation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I collaborate with colleagues that do both peripheral neural stimulation as well as direct brain stimulation. And it's just hard. You know, brain-computer interfaces coming out of the brain in order to control robot hands is kind of a forward problem. You take lots of data about the brain signals, and then you can dive into controlling a robot with that. But then in order to give feedback, you need to find just the right set of neurons to stimulate in the brain or elsewhere, and actually targeting those specific locations is just a huge technical, biotechnical challenge. So people are absolutely working on that, but for now, I'm thinking most people here are not going to sign themselves up for an invasive brain stimulation study, but the hope is to someday be able to get there.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.